Welcome everyone to the San Francisco Psychedelic Society. This is our members meeting, our monthly members community campfire. I'm so honored to be with you here tonight. Thank you to all of our members who have been an integral part of our organization. Your monthly and annual contribution is truly the foundation and backbone to keep our organization alive and thriving and nourished. So thank you so much for supporting us and for being with us here today from all over the world. I'm Danielle Negrin. I'm the director of this organization, and I'm here with Emily Ruth. Do you want to say hi, Emily?
Hello, everyone. Welcome. So honored to be here with you tonight.
Great. And tonight we have an incredible special guest, Meagan Kenney, and she is the director and founder of Third Realm Integration, who we will be bringing on for an incredible presentation tonight all about embodying the extraordinary states of consciousness into our ordinary lives. But first, I have a brief announcement with Hannah. Hannah has been an integral part of our membership community and working with us week after week to grow it. So Hannah, do you want to pop in and say hi?
Yeah, absolutely. Can everyone hear me? Oh, 1 second. Okay, great. Can everyone hear me?
Yes.
Amazing. Hi, everyone. I'm super excited to be here. These meetings are always super impactful for me, and I know that a lot of other people have gotten a lot out of these monthly meetings, and so just super excited to be here with the community. And thank you, Danielle, for this opportunity. But we are growing our speaker set here, and if you guys were at the last month's campfire, Danielle and Amanda talked about some really great ways that psychedelics are helping people, especially in end of life and palliative care. And we found it really impactful to have members speak at these things. And we know that a lot of you have certain specialties that you're all in as well. And we would love to hear from all of you. So we're looking for more members to come on and fill spots in the upcoming community campfires. There's a spot open in August. There's spots open for the rest of the year as well. So I'm going to be coordinating a lot of that. So if you have something that you'd like to speak on that you're really passionate about, we definitely want to hear from you. So Danielle's going to send out an email where we're taking speaker forms and you guys can fill out what you would like to speak on. And then I'll be contacting you and trying to set something up and just getting an understanding of what your talk is about, and we'll make it happen. So we definitely want to hear from you as a community, and it's just super impactful to be able to connect with you all. There's a lot of like minds here, but I know there's also a ton of diversity in things that we can bring to the table. So please reach out, and I'm really looking forward to connecting with all of you on potentially being speakers at our upcoming community campfires.
Thank you so much, Hannah. I really appreciate that. And we're looking forward to really developing and growing and featuring a lot of the important voices in our membership community. So we will follow up with all of you about that. And Emily, if you could please place that in the chat. Without further ado, I am so honored to welcome and introduce our incredible speaker and actually a dear friend of mine. I met Meagan because she was the host and founder of the Addictionary podcast, which is an incredible podcast exploring every realm of addiction recovery, consciousness, expansion, and beyond. And I really connected with Meagan, and I've had the opportunity to stay friends with her over the years. And she's recently developed an incredible program called Third Realm Integration. And tonight we will be exploring the depths of consciousness and the power of density through the lens of heart-centering integration. And when we journey through altered states, we get to experience these extraordinary states of being. And so many of the questions that many people come to our groups with is, how do we integrate these extraordinary states of being into our ordinary lives? And how do we transcend addiction and trauma through the use of psychedelics? So tonight, Meagan is going to speak all about that evolutionary process of integration work. And she has such a unique technique that she uses. And I've been incredibly impacted, inspired by her work. And she has come to understand her own dependency patterns that manifested in her physical form as addiction. And she's been able to completely transmute that addiction, and it now helps people on their path and integrate psychedelic experiences, helping people on the path of addiction recovery. So welcoming Meagan to our community. She's a transpersonal integration specialist and certified psychedelic integration coach. She's also an energy healer and a compassion meditation teacher that has many years of experience in the mental health and addiction field as a coach, a therapist, and sober companion and consultant. And she has a master's degree in clinical mental health and counseling with an emphasis in forensic and correctional counseling. So she has many other degrees that I could go on and on about speaking about, but Meagan, you're incredible. I'm so grateful to know you on this path, and it's just such an honor to welcome you to our community campfire.
Thank you, Danielle. Thank you for that wonderful introduction. And thank you all for inviting me into this incredibly sacred space. I feel grateful. I feel lucky. And I feel lucky that I have had my own experiences with pain and suffering that has allowed me to get to a place here where I'm going to talk to you guys about how I moved through my own journey, but also sort of like what this work means to me and how I'm able to show up in the presence of other people's suffering because of the work that I've done to integrate my own suffering using a method of heart centering meditation specific to psychedelic integration. And I'll break down sort of like what all of that looks like. And then I have the pleasure of sort of doing a live demonstration on how I actually do this work with clients in individual coaching. So again, I just want to thank you all for allowing me to be here. And Danielle, you are an absolute rock star. I'm so grateful that the Addictionary podcast brought us together. And here we are again in a space where we are pushing the mission forward to open opportunities for folks to explore their own consciousness and find healing through that process. So I would like to start with a grounding meditation that I introduced to my clients in our very first session. And so before I jump into that, I just want to explain a little bit about why grounding our energy, especially when it comes to working out of the heart center, which is what I'm going to be talking about tonight, is important and how it's relevant to the work that I do. Then I'll share a little bit about how I learned to work this process myself, and how I've sort of been able to walk this path from the inside out. And I always say to my clients, I would never ask you to do something that I haven't done myself. I'm a researcher at heart, and I do it from an experiential perspective. So it's like I sign up to do the research on myself, because if I can have the lived experience of what it actually feels like to make the breakthrough or to practice the technique, then it's that much more real and authentic in my delivery and how I share it with people and sort of have them walk into what the experience actually looks and feels like. And I talk about it from the inside out. And then I'll just talk about how I knew I was ungrounded more often in my life than not, and how that took shape in my trauma history, which I won't get too much into, but I think it's relevant, and my addiction, and then sort of how I landed in the place of being now a professional, sort of holding these both of these spheres. But essentially, the reason why I teach people how to ground their energy is because it really does provide a foundation for how we do heart centering work. It's the first ingredient to the process. If we're sort of running around in life completely ungrounded, and that for some people can look like massive anxiety, obsessive compulsive behaviors and patterns, it could look like hypomania or mania. It could even look like psychosis, where you're split off from the psyche as a result of some sort of debilitating fear that has sort of made its way in. And so I can't actually get somebody to drop into the heart, as I'm going to be talking about today, if their energy isn't already grounded. And the hope is that through being able to ground our own energy, we begin to cultivate internal resources to manage the reactions that we have to triggers that would otherwise derail us. And so for folks who have been through some of the more traditional styles of somatic therapy, you may have heard something called the window of tolerance, which is basically the place where you live in which you have the most tolerance to manage the triggers around you. It's kind of like how we hear people talk about being in a flow state, where the challenge that's in front of you is just challenging enough to make it fun and interesting and exciting, but not so difficult that the challenge actually consumes you. And instead, you sort of settle into an ease and a flow as to how you're actually doing the work. And through grounding our energy, the hope is also that we can harness our energy. We can essentially scale it down, manage it, and then take ownership over it so we can direct it better and be a driver of it and how we use it and how we experience it, as opposed to being victimized by it. So let's break into a grounding meditation. I always say to people, get comfortable. If that means shutting off your camera or turning your camera away from you for the time being, go ahead and do that so you can sort of settle into this meditation and feel connected to the earth as I sort of help you lock into the earth's core through the visualization. So sometimes you'll see people when they start a meditation, they'll have their hands up. When we have our hands up, we're sort of signaling the universe that we're open to receive the energy that lives beyond us. If we're trying to ground our energy, it's usually because we already have enough of it and we're actually trying to take it down. We don't want to take in any more because we kind of already have enough. So go ahead and start to get comfortable in your seat by first placing your hands down, maybe on the tops of your thighs. Just sort of let the universe know I have what I need. I'm setting a psychic boundary. I'm not taking on any more, and I'm going to work with what I have. So hands face down. And get your soles of your feet connected to the floor beneath you. Knees maybe at a 90-degree angle. And allow your body to settle deeply into your seat as you feel your body being supported by the chair beneath you. Now visualize that you have a string at the top of your head, and I'm pulling the string upward towards the ceiling. Start to activate your spine here as you sit upright and feel the muscles in your core just engage slightly. Go ahead and relax your shoulders. Allow your shoulders to drop away from your ears. And visualize your shoulder blades actually melting down your back. Bring your awareness up to the muscles in your face and your head. See if you can relax the muscles behind your eyes, around your mouth, and in your jaw. You might even let your jaw hang open slightly as you fall deeper into a state of relaxation. Still staying activated with your posture. If closing your eyes feels comfortable, go ahead and do that. If not, take a soft gaze. Maybe focus on the spot on the floor in front of you. And we're going to start here with 3 deep and controlled breaths, bringing each breath in through the nose and then releasing out through the mouth, where your exhale is just going to be slightly longer than your inhale. Go ahead and take a deep breath in through the nose, draw the oxygen down deep into the base of the belly. Allow your belly to expand. And then go ahead and release that air through the mouth by contracting the muscles in your belly. Exhale slightly longer than your inhale, pushing all of that air out of your core. When you're ready, another deep breath in through the nose. Bring the breath all the way down to the base of the belly so you can turn over any stale air that still might be living in your core. With your exhale, release the breath out through the mouth. You're releasing any stagnant energy that no longer serves you as you release it back out to the cosmos. Another deep breath in through the nose. Allow the breath to drop to the base of the belly as you draw in new life to your core. And hold it here for a moment at the top of the breath before you exhale. When you're ready, go ahead and exhale, release that breath out through the mouth, contracting the muscles in your stomach. See if you can relax into a deeper state of consciousness here as you return to a breath that feels seamless and effortless for you. Just remember to breathe through the course of this exercise. And as you employ the breath, allow the mind to follow your breath as best as possible. And we're going to work through the 7 chakra points of the body. And we're first going to start at 7th chakra, right above the head. We'll move all the way down to the root chakra, which we will open and activate today as we send your energy down into the core of the earth. So let's start by visualizing an orb of light, probably the size of a grapefruit, sitting right above your scalp. It's hovering right above your scalp. And this is a really bright, bright, bright light. Visualize this orb of light now dropping into the top of your head. Allow it to move down behind your eyes. Feel it move down your throat until it reaches the heart center or the heart chakra, which is just to the right of the physical heart. And as you hold that orb of light right in the heart center, we're going to activate the heart space here and activate the frequency of compassion, which is the highest frequency of energy that we can get. And begin to visualize this orb of light filling up your entire body all the way out to your fingertips and toes until you become a full light body, where this bright light is filling every cell of your being to the point where you're now a glowing entity. You might even feel a warm sensation in your body somewhere here. And if so, just take notice. Hold your energy here in the heart space for just a moment as you stay dropped into the heart. Bring your focus back to the heart center. And even though your body is completely lit up, still focus on this orb of light right in the chest, center of the chest, in the heart space. We're going to visualize moving this orb of light down 1 floor in the elevator of your body as it moves down into the center of your stomach, through your solar plexus region, down through your sacral chakra, and into your root chakra, so right at the base of your tailbone. Now imagine this energy center at the base of your tailbone, which is where you want your energy to be when you're grounding. Imagine that space begins to open. And we're activating the space in the root chakra before we send it down into the earth. Allow any tension in that area to begin to dissipate. Visualize it releasing from your body. See if you can bring your attention to your hip muscles and any of the muscles in your lower back. See if you can ask that tension present to release ever so slightly. And now imagine that that ray of light that has just traveled down each energy center of your body, it's now going through your chair, straight down into the floor as it moves down through the dirt and the sand and the rocks in the water as it goes down, 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 down into the core of the earth. And here you are taking your energy and driving it into the core of the earth. And when it reaches the core of the earth, I want you to visualize a hook at the end of your light source. Now hooks directly into the core of the earth. And I want it to feel like there's tension on this ray of light. It's firm, it's steady, and it has you locked in to the center of the earth. And in fact, this tension is allowing you to feel so steady that if a hurricane or tornado came through here, you wouldn't even budge. You would stay directly planted exactly where you are. Lock that energy light source into the core of the earth, hold it steady there. Take 3 deep breaths in through the nose, down to the base of the belly, and release up out through the mouth. And if you feel so compelled, you can leave your light source locked into the core of the earth. As we come to the end of our meditation, you feel like you need a little extra stability today, or if you feel so inclined, visualize yourself severing the light source between you and the core of the earth, drawing your energy back up into your physical body, bringing it back up, leaving it right in the heart space, and coming back into this space and time by wiggling your fingers and your toes. And honoring the work that you just did to transmute any ungrounded energy that may have been left in your physical body from the day or even the last week. And when you're ready, if you shut your camera off and you'd like to turn it back on, we welcome you back into this space. So just do a brief check-in with yourself, see how you feel, see if that activated anything for you, or if you feel like your energy feels a little bit more manageable. But essentially, the goal is to ground the energy while simultaneously activating that heart space, because that's where the real work is. And I'm going to get into a little bit of what that actually means. First, I think it just sort of makes sense to just share a little bit about my story, how I came into this work, how third realm integration became a thing, how I cultivated this definition of integration based on a Carl Jung inspired philosophy and the work of my meditation teacher, Dr. Melissa Lowe, and why I think it's essential to integrate in this way when trying to heal from addiction and trauma, plus make the most out of our psychedelic revelations. And that's not to say that there's anything wrong with existing definitions of integration. I just feel like this, for me in particular, and for the other people that I've worked with where it resonates, there's a quality to being able to transform and transcend some of these patterns that we've been stuck in for maybe a lifetime, maybe many lifetimes, that you get from working out of the heart space, which is why I call it integration. So it's a much different definition of integration, but nonetheless, I think it at least deserves a seat at the table. So I can trace sort of my story. Sometimes people will tell their story of recovery and they kind of, they start with childhood, or they'll start with the actual patterns of addiction. For me, at this point in my life, based on the work that I've done, and because I do this heart centering work myself, it's pretty clear to me what my patterns are. And I'm going to talk about wounding patterns today quite a bit. And social anxiety for me was always the most debilitating part of my whole existence, to the point where junior year of high school, I'd missed like almost 40 days of school because I literally could not walk through the doors of the high school. And that's when this whole journey of trying to figure out what kept me stuck actually started. Now, at the time that I was really dealing with social anxiety in this way, I had no clarity on like what it was, where it was coming from, why I had it. I remember in early recovery, I even had a family member ask me one time, you know, like a lot of people suffer trauma, like serious trauma, and then they end up with an addiction as a result of that. And I remember them saying, like, kind of like, what's your excuse? Like, what happened to you? And I remember that being like a really like distressing question to me, because it was like, one, I had to prove some reason as to why I was justified in falling into the depths of addiction, because it really was the way I was self-medicating. But two, I actually had to try to figure out like what the answer to that question was myself. And I'll get to how I sort of came to that. But the long and short of it is I grew up in a house with a dad who was actively using and lived a life of complete chaos, and a very dangerous life at that. He drew in a lot of chaos based on the lifestyle that he was living, that my mom and I were both exposed to. Me being an only child makes it pretty difficult to ignore and avoid some of these patterns that were evident in my family. And so being the only one there to absorb it meant I was kind of like taking all of it on. Now we have dad struggling with active addiction, chaotic lifestyle, chaotic home life. Mom, who was the rescuer, in some circles, they would say codependent, but nonetheless, her narcissism, right? Because it shows up in all these different ways. Addiction is sort of one form of it, but her sort of like benign, innocent narcissism shows up in the form of her wanting to be the rescuer to save my dad from himself. So I have a mom who's riddled with anxiety, trying to be the rescuer of someone who can't even contain their own energy, which is why my dad was using drugs, because he couldn't manage it otherwise himself. And then here I am, this child receiving and absorbing all of this chaos, instability, and unpredictability. Okay. So at this point, it's very clear after doing all of this work what the wounding pattern for me actually was. And essentially, what a wounding pattern is, based on Carl Jung's work, is a fear-based reaction that lives in our unconscious mind that we all have access to as human beings with the collective unconscious. Some of us just have stronger manifestations of the pattern than others. So for some of us, the patterns are just deeper, heavier, more dense. For me, the two primary wounding patterns that came out of the insights that I had to go back and do some trauma work on my life was that I have a reaction to incompetent authority. So people like dad being in a position of power to be my parent, not being able to hold that power because of his own struggles. So now my unconscious mind is reading that as an incompetent authority figure, i.e., I'm now unsafe in the presence of incompetent authority figures. So that manifests into all sorts of things in my adult life, of resistance to bosses, resistance to rules that I can't respect, and the like. Then we have this dependency pattern that actually ends up being what manifests in the physical form as my addiction. But essentially what it was me not wanting to own my power, being afraid of my power, and never really knowing what real power ever was, because any power that I saw around me as a little kid was the power of me being taken over by someone else's chaos. So chaos in my home as a child, that as a child, I could not stop. Trying to get in the middle of two adults who were in a complete state of turmoil, and the child, me, feeling compelled to step in to sort of like try to stop the chaos, but not being successful at doing it. So instead of fight it, what happens? I later in life, because this dependency pattern and fear of integrating my own power is very present, I end up finding an experience with the drug opioids that I surrender to. I surrender to the seduction of the drug. So I become dependent on the drug to take me where I need to go, because I couldn't do it on my own. Now, what did the drug do for me? Well, for somebody with debilitating social anxiety and massive pain, and I don't mean physical pain, I mean emotional pain, grief, and all sorts of other things that were completely unresolved, especially at the time, the opioids numb the emotional pain. They don't just numb the physical pain, they numb the emotional stuff too. So as long as I could get rid of the social anxiety, I was able to show up in life in ways where how I wanted to be. I could numb the parts of myself that I didn't like, and I could see more of the parts of myself that I did like. So it was me with no social anxiety. Now, I developed a whole host of other problems secondary to the drug use, but social anxiety wasn't one of them. And that was kind of like the only one I really cared about at the time. Now, if we look at my addiction as a physical manifestation of an unconscious pattern with dependency and power that was not yet in my conscious awareness, that basically what I come to believe about this is that my social anxiety did not cause my addiction, but rather my addiction was what the physical form was of my fears, my pattern with dependency and power that showed up in the physical form. So unresolved patterns in the unconscious mind that have not been integrated equals addiction. And that's how I conceptualize it. Now, long story short, I won't get too long into my story of recovery. Long story short, I find Vivitrol and then eventually cannabis. And that's how all of this really started to come together. But in the middle of those two, I decided to go see a therapist, traditional talk therapy, CBT, and it worked for when I needed it to work for and for what. So it definitely served its function for the time that it did. But it was probably a year or two into traditional talk therapy that I decided, now I'm in recovery, really passionate about this subject. I'm really passionate about the flaws in the addiction treatment world, how we pathologize people, how we label people, how we don't believe that a condition like addiction can be transcended. You got a problem with all of that. So what do? I'm like, okay, I'm going to go to school. I'm going to get a master's degree in counseling because I am interested in how the mind works. I'm interested in exploring my own mind. And I think I might be able to relate to people's experiences enough to maybe be able to help them. So through all this revelation that I'm now making as a provider going through the training, seeing patients year one, by the way, in this training program, that's when I come upon the realization that I actually had trauma in the form of a disrupted attachment relationship with my mother that I needed to sort out. So I decide that this therapist isn't the person to take me deeper into this work. And so I leave that therapist. And at the time I'm on public health insurance through the state of Massachusetts, wasn't working and was a student. And I had the plan that nobody wanted to take because the reimbursement rates were so low. So I'm like, I don't even know how. I'm just going to have to find some, regular therapist. But, let me try looking on Psychology Today for a humanistic therapist. Because at this point, I'm now getting familiar with what humanism is. And I'm like, I like this. That feels like me. That feels like the work I want to do. Go on Psychology Today, put in the criteria. And lo and behold, no pun intended, Dr. Melissa Lowe pops up. Okay. And I have no idea what kind of style of therapy she's even doing, but she came up under the filtering criteria of humanistic therapy. And turns out she is, my mother from another lifetime and my teacher who I've now been working with for almost 5 years that literally taught me not only everything I need to know just about life in general, but especially about this heart centering approach because this is her work. And she developed this method working with her teacher, Dr. Brew Joy, who has since passed. And now I'm taking this model, thankfully with Dr. Lowe's blessing, to expand it out into the psychedelic therapy and medicine sphere, and also applying it to people who have a history of addiction or substance use troubles. So that was kind of like the cosmic joke, was that under no circumstances should I have ever found somebody who is this tremendous at what they do, especially being on public health insurance. I thought that there was no possible way that this would ever happen. And the fact that it did, I think, speaks to sort of other dynamics energetically that might have been at play at the time that I was ready to receive the teacher. Then she showed up, which we all know that quote. So I took the work with her very seriously. And as soon as I started to find relief in this method, I was completely sold. And I knew I had to do what I could to share this with other people if they were ready to receive it. And a few things sort of happened that kind of pushed me into developing third realm integration. And it was the most painful experience of, I think, maybe a year, 2 years leading up to when I started third realm. That was the hardest part of my recovery to date. It was harder than getting off of the drugs. It was harder than managing the pain and the trauma being on the drugs. Long story short, I was at a graduate school. I had now gone into a clinical psychology doctoral program after the master's degree. Wasn't done yet. Still felt like, and again, fear of stepping into my own power, feeling like I needed more. I needed more education. I was not prepared yet. I was still insecure. Okay, so I go on enter into a PsyD program, doctorate degree for clinical psychology. And I'm like a year away from graduating. And all of a sudden, everything started going wrong. The collective of the school, at this point, now I'm out with my story of recovery, and I'm sort of like making some waves. I'm doing interviews at the school, starting the podcast, and I'm talking about stuff that nobody at this school is talking about, nor wants to talk about. I'm sort of pushing the envelope. I'm critical of the existing treatment industry, how they're profiting off of people suffering. And I have all these ideas as to how we're going to change it. And when you're part of a collective that subscribes to an idea, a philosophy, and a way of being, that system gets threatened by any ideas that you're bringing to the table or just sort of like what you represent, it can be a gnarly road. And so what ended up happening was the collective pushed me out. All sorts of things fell apart at the school, all sorts of crazy stuff that I won't get into, but essentially I had to leave the school with a year left of becoming a doctor to then figure out another path, because there was no way in hell I was going to be able to stay in this collective that I was getting like beaten up by every step of the way. I felt wounded by it. I felt victimized by it. And I was also working a job in mental health where I was a recovery coach, where it was so freaking stressful. And you had to be on call 24/7. And the CEO would text you and call you and email you all hours of the night. And you were expected to sort of like respond within 5 minutes. Now, somebody with me with poor psychic boundaries, somebody says in an authority position, even though I resist it, I still am afraid to integrate my own power and like say no. So they say jump and I say, well, how high? Now, and so now I'm burning the candle at both ends. So I have this obedience to incompetent authority that I would force myself into, which then caused me great distress. But if I had my choice, I wouldn't work for anybody. I'd work for myself, but afraid of my own power again. So was left no choice but to leave the school I was at, transfer into a PhD program in transpersonal psychology and consciousness studies at CIIS, and took it as a blessing that the universe had pushed me into a direction where I had no choice but to step into my power and independence in some sort of newfound way. And then a year later, ended up quitting that job, went off on my own, still afraid to step into my power. So now I have 5 years of training in a clinical psychology doctoral program, a year of training in a PhD program, 3 years of training in a master's degree with clinical mental health counseling, still feeling like I didn't know enough. By the way, doing all the podcast for 3 years, interviewing everybody around the world about this stuff, still not feeling like I was confident enough to do it on my own. So I got certified as a psychedelic integration coach, got certified in Reiki as a practitioner, and then felt like, okay, all right, maybe I can do it. And that's when I started Third Realm. And it's interesting because a lot of the patterns around dependency and authority that caused me great distress up until this point sort of started to dissolve when I took the power back into my own hands, became my own boss, which told me I really wasn't meant to work for anybody else. I was really meant to harness my own power and my own energy and kind of figure out what I was going to bring to the table here, how I was going to make a difference in the mental health and addiction treatment landscape, and what that was actually going to look like. So before I dig into the Third Realm integration model at length, Danielle, I want to open up the space for you to jump in and ask any questions that you have. I know this is a common question that comes up of like, okay, if we're working with the unconscious mind, how do we make the unconscious mind or material in the unconscious mind conscious? And how do you do that? So I'll turn it over to you for any questions, Danielle, before I dive in.
You read my mind, Megan. Thank you so much for sharing your story and opening up in that beautiful way. Just after everything you've been through and all the insights of life that has brought you, I love that how you've alchemized it into this potent work for humanity. So with that, what comes to my mind, you've been speaking about the unconscious mind. How do we bring the unconscious mind to the conscious mind? And with that, like a two-part question to that would be like, where do you see the collective unconscious becoming more conscious?
Great question. So I literally came up with the name Third Realm Integration because according to Carl Jung's work, the third realm is the imaginative, unseen, energetic space in which the practitioner's unconscious mind meets the client's unconscious mind, and that's where the imagination can unfold. What integration means for me is through my ability to stay into the heart space and have unconditional love and compassion for the folks that I'm working with and myself, meaning that I am safe and comfortable in the presence of their suffering, which means I'm also safe and comfortable in the presence of my own suffering. And I have enough space to hold all of this for everybody. I then access that third realm. I'm listening for specific things that the person is bringing to me, either from their week of what they had reactions to throughout the week, and we unpack that, or if they have a psychedelic experience, they bring in material from that revelation and we start to unpack that. Again, still coming from the wounding pattern. So my first job is to figure out what this person's wounding pattern might actually be, because then I'm going to take that and I'm going to construct that into a personalized meditation for them so they can actually start integrating their own suffering by accessing the fears that live in the unconscious mind that are 10 layers deep. And so I go 1 foot into the third realm, 1 foot here. I'm seeing, reading, observing, taking in whatever I can take in about what this person's saying to me as I'm trying to read 10 layers deep into what they're saying by hearing for the patterns. And then we work through it in the meditation where the person is actually sitting with that fear. And I'll get to that in a second of what that actually looks like. But essentially, I'm showing the client something, some part of themselves that they would otherwise remain unconscious to. And the reason why the material is remaining unconscious is because the psyche is not ready to process it yet. How do we allow people to enter into a space where they feel like they can process that stuff, where they have to feel safe? They have to feel like they're with somebody that gets it. They have to be able to feel like anything they're bringing to the table is not weird, not uncommon, not unhuman. It's a part of the human condition. It's a part of the collective unconscious that we all share. And so working through the heart, I'm integrating my own suffering, which means I can help clients integrate theirs. And helping to uncover the shadow parts of the psyche that live in the client's unconscious mind is what integration actually is. And so when I'm just going to use just like a brief description around quantum physics real quick to sort of explain why this is also energy medicine. But when you work out of the heart space and you're employing, like we did in the grounding meditation, where you're activating that space and you're feeling the love, the compassion and unconditional love fill your body in the form of light, you're actually working with the highest frequency of energy that you can get. Because through the heart that's a universal language of love. I mean, it doesn't get any better than that. Now, when you think about quantum physics, just matter alone, if you have a molecule that is of low frequency energy in the presence of a molecule that's a high frequency energy, the high frequency molecule will obliterate the low frequency molecule and turn it into dust. So as long as I'm in the heart space, present with my clients, I am helping elevate material in their unconscious mind up into conscious awareness just by showing up with a particular frequency, and which is why it's important for me to drop into the heart and to meditate before every client. And I meditate on every client's energy before I show up for session, because I also need to kind of get a sense of what I'm reading, what I'm pulling in. And so the work really is me. I really am the vessel. And the hope is that as I'm present through the heart space, I'm activating shadow material up out of the client in a safe and contained way, helping them ground their energy, helping them move through this, make sense of it, that we can then turn into integration. And so I call this transpersonal work, because transpersonal psychology is all about accessing different states of consciousness from here all the way to the cosmos that can provide us insight and opportunity for healing. So 3D reality is what we're in right now, talking to each other, touching the table we're sitting in front of. 4D is in the heart. And then you get 5, 6, 7D when you start elevating up into the crown chakra, third eye, that type of stuff. And that's what makes it transpersonal. Some people ask me that, what does transpersonal integration code actually mean? It's transpersonal because I'm employing all of that, that philosophy as well. And I even actually do add astrology in for folks that are open to that. I do use the planetary archetypes to help make sense of these patterns, because the cosmos actually hold these patterns for us. Back to the idea of a physical manifestation of something. We are the physical form. In my spiritual beliefs, this is not for everybody. I would never expect anybody to believe all of this. For me, I find solace in believing that there's order in the cosmos that then show up in physical form. So as a result, I don't feel so wounded by the things that happen in my life, because I'm like, okay, this is like a higher order experience that I'm just seeing in physical form because I'm a human being. But this isn't like a personal attack on me. This is just somebody else's projections onto me as a result of their own suffering. And so I'll pause there before I get into what the definition from my perspective is of integration. But Danielle, I am curious, like when I do talk about this type of stuff, like you being deeply immersed into the psychedelic sphere, when people talk about integration, what do you typically hear when people say that word? And then I'll break into sort of like how I define it.
I think there's so much conversation and there's so much nebulous conversation around what integration is in the psychedelic community. We often get a lot of people asking us, what does it mean to integrate? Aren't we always integrating? And doesn't the integration process, like, when does it end? And what I hear a lot of common themes around integration is finding different practices that can help people integrate the experience, whether it's journaling, whether it's yoga, speaking. We really highlight on speaking in different integration groups as a means of unpacking our experiences, gaining meaning and insights from other people in the community. And I love the concept of like embodying the extraordinary states of being into our ordinary lives, like actually changing our lives and transforming our lives in the way that the medicine is guiding us to. We can have so many psychedelic experiences, but if we don't actually listen to the messages that come through, even if the message is to relax more in our lives, if we ignore that, then we're really just having an experience, but we're not using it as a tool to change. And I think so many people that come to our organization and work with these psychedelic medicines do them with the intention to shift parts of their consciousness or release parts of their lives. So I'm curious for you, as you dedicate your life's work to us, what does integration mean to you, and how do you work with clients to integrate these life-changing tools into their lives?
So for me, I have a very specific definition of integration, and it is really solely built off of Carl Jung's definition of individuation. It's how do we create enough space in our psychic container to invite in the dark parts of our psyche that we otherwise would split off from and fragment from, that when we do show up in neuroses like addiction, anxiety, depression, OCD, bipolar disorder, psychosis. How do we invite those parts in and stand side by side to that suffering and not be afraid of it so much so that we have to split off and run away from it? How do we do that? Well, we have to get the ego to surrender. The way we get the ego to surrender, large in part, comes from getting the body online. So like that grounding meditation, if I can get you to physically activate your body in some way through a visualization, through a breathing technique, whatever the case may be, your ego then gets cued in to say, I don't have to do the job of everything here. We have a mind and we have a body. And if we've been split off from our body through self-hatred, body image stuff, eating disorders, self-harm, addiction, all sorts of mental health challenges, we've been split off from the body. The body isn't doing its job, therefore it gives too much responsibility to the ego that then overworks and shows up in the form of neuroses. Jung would say neuroses, or Freud would be the core foundation of all mental health challenges. So we got to get the ego to surrender and we need to employ the body to get the ego to know that it can take a back seat. So now we have both leveled up and in balance. Now, the integration piece, how do we know we're integrating? Well, we know we're integrating when we begin to have less reactivity to the hooks that otherwise would trigger us. So you can't stop the hooks from coming in, but you can integrate your experience of the hook and release yourself from reacting to the hook. So I tell people the hooks are still going to come in, but this time the hook isn't going to stay and lock you up. The hook's going to come in and keep moving and keep moving. And you're going to find yourself experiencing life in a less personally wounding way. You're no longer going to feel a victim of your life circumstances. You're hopefully going to shift. And this is timeline is totally dependent on divine timing, how ready people are to go to this work, what experiences they've already had with sort of looking at their suffering in the eye. But essentially the hope is that we can become more non-reactive to life circumstances. We can begin to serve as our own container because we know we actually have enough room for all the shit, all of our shit, everyone else's shit. We have all the space for the suffering. We don't have to worry about getting overtaken or taken down or consumed or wounded by it. And when you work out of the heart space, it becomes more seamless to do that work. Now, does that happen overnight? No. Probably took me about 2 years before I had my first real deal moment of relief doing this work. But I believed enough in it to keep going. And, I think there's something to that because staying in it allowed me to really remain open to what was about to come. And then these sort of like breakthrough moments continue to happen. But essentially, the goal of the integration from my perspective is to identify wounding patterns. Wounding patterns are always rooted in a fear. So typically I take a reaction somebody had to something, I identify what, or help them identify, they identify to me what was scary or frightening about that experience. And that's when we have our wounding pattern. And I know in my head that wounding patterns live in two buckets, masculine energy and feminine energy. When we are stuck in the masculine dynamics, it's about power and control. So the fear is fear of being powerless, fear of being out of control. When we have the wounds in the feminine energy, it's about value and love. Fear that we don't have enough value and fears that we're not lovable enough. People are going to reject us, they're going to leave us, they're going to abandon us, and we're not good enough for them to stay. So the way that I then shift that, once I've identified the wounding pattern, we then create a meditation out of that. So I ask the person to hold the space of the feeling of being powerless, for example, meaning think back to a time in your life in which you felt powerless, or if that feels too uncomfortable, identify somebody that you know, or something that you would see out in the world that you could identify as somebody being powerless, and you hold the image of that as you drop into the heart, work with the body, and allow the ego to surrender, knowing that this sort of like scary pattern is what we're going to work on integrating. And we're going to sit with this image long enough for the fear to lose its power over us. And we hold the image of that person or that experience out in front of us. I have people use a mantra that I got directly from Dr. Lowe. I give and receive compassion and unconditional love. And I'm having that person visually work out of their physical heart, where they're visualizing a ray of light in the form of the compassion frequency, compassion and unconditional love, moving through their heart, out through a ray of light into the heart of the image of the person they're holding in front of them, back through their heart and back again. And I've done this with a number of clients. Not all clients are ready to go right to the wounding patterns. Some people, the wounding patterns are coming up first session and they're ready to go in. Some people, it takes 3 months longer for us to get there. But I have worked with folks in the past who, I'll give you just one quick example, a woman who struggled with fibromyalgia. I bring the story up because it still blows my mind. The only reason why I know it's real is because I still work with this client. But we did this whole process, did this whole thing, did a meditation specific to her wounding pattern. Lots of tears, lots of, I'm not going to call it inner child work because we're asking the adult psyche to show up to do this work. Inner child work means we're asking the child archetype to come in, and we can't have the child archetype do this work because the ego is not matured enough. It's not developed enough. So this is not inner child work, but you are healing apart from potentially your childhood. And long story short, this woman, after that meditation, has not had one symptom of her fibromyalgia since. And I will say, just to the point about the masculine and the feminine energy, in my belief system, people that end up having a physical manifestation of a chronic pain condition like fibromyalgia is because their masculine and feminine energy is not actually in balance. Something has popped out of balance. So if we can get those patterns to kind of quiet, and we can ask the body to come online, then you can start to see how this manifests for people and their symptoms will actually start to go away. So before I jump into sort of like the last piece of what the point is of this integration, so like, why not just stay in the astral plane? Why not just stay in the 5D realm? Why do we have to have this human experience and bring it back here and like plant our feet and like make sense of all this? Before I jump there, Danielle, I was thinking if we could just do a live demonstration for folks where maybe you can present me with a revelation that you had under a medicine or something that was sort of like earth shattering for you. And then I'll see if I can sort of piece apart what I'm hearing as the wounding pattern to then see if that sort of makes sense to you and if that resonates. And then I would just describe how I would turn that into a meditation for you.
I love that. Thank you, Megan. Really appreciate your depth and how you explore these topics and apply so much of the higher realms and a cosmic experience to the extraordinary states of being. So I'm going to get really vulnerable and share a bit about an experience I had. And I love that we're doing this demonstration because I've heard many different talks about integration, but so rarely do we get to see an actual demonstration of how a therapist or a coach helps someone integrate a specific experience. So a little bit about my story and what led me to this experience I had been struggling with addiction for 12 years of my life and prescribed over 100 different medications. Was addicted to opioids and Xanax and cocaine and was just heavily reliant on substances. And I really believed in the medical system. I really believed in these drugs for them to heal me and heal my life. And I looked so often outside of myself to doctors and therapists, my family, to tell me what to do with my consciousness, and went to like 8 different rehabs, and these rehabs put me on a slew of different medications. And it was always me looking to these medical establishment and these treatment centers that have dedicated their lives to apparently helping people to tell me what to do with my consciousness. And I struggled for 12 years and was really never getting better. And I finally kind of woke up and was like, well, maybe these drugs are my problem. And I started slowly withdrawing off the medication, and I ended up getting arrested and driving on something that a Xanax that was prescribed to me. And that just completely shattered my earth reality. I thought I was doing something right. And, I was following doctor's orders, and suddenly I'm getting handcuffed by the establishment. And in addition to that, getting off of all these medications just completely caused me tons of withdrawal symptoms and pain in my life, and really debilitated me for many years. So I finally started working with psychedelics after I came off this medication. And my second psychedelic experience was under ayahuasca. And immediately in that experience, it was telling me I was outside under the stars, and the medicine was telling me that everything I've been told is a lie and that the earth was flat. And I could not get off of this belief that this was a flat earth that we were living on. I did not believe that the earth was a spinning ball. And for some reason, this like really stuck in my consciousness for many different journeys. And I just felt so betrayed by the medical system, and I started feeling betrayed by my school and everything I was taught, and just thinking that everything was a lie, that I really bought into the lie that these pharmaceuticals were supposed to help me, that these doctors were helping me. They completely abandoned me after I got off these drugs, and I really felt attached to being a victim of that system. And so I what was hard for me was to integrate all of this feeling of feeling like everything was a lie, and feeling like the earth was flat, and that I wasn't on this spinning ball. And then I just started questioning the moon and the stars, and is any of this real? I questioned my entire reality, and that really stuck with me for a long time. And I continue to question so much of the reality that is presented to us. And I know that a lot of these beliefs that come through the psychedelic experience aren't necessarily true, but I believe that they are symbolic, and they do hold representation of what happens in the subconscious mind. And it's especially with ayahuasca, she works in such a poetic way, and she works through a lot of imagery and different messages. And that's an experience that happened to me, and I'd love to hear your insights on it.
Awesome. I love it. Thank you. Thank you so much for sharing that. And also just getting vulnerable. I don't think it's easy to particularly come to the realization that we've been victimized by a collective. So the way that I talk about it in energy work is when we start to have reactions to things in our personal life with people, it can be much easier to face that suffering. We know we're working through it when it hits us from the collective. So it's moved out one ring in the orbit from the interpersonal to now the collective. But I will say that's the hardest piece to work through, because who can kind of stand up to the power of a collective? A collective is bigger than you, it's stronger energy than you. And when that wound takes shape, it's that much more debilitating than like a friend that betrayed you. When it's a collective that betrayed you, it takes on a totally different experience. So what I'm hearing here around the wounding patterns is actually both the power dynamic, but also maybe and I wouldn't make this primary for you. I probably would wait a little bit to dig into this and see what else came up. But the feeling of being betrayed and abandoned by the collective, we're working with those two dynamics of the masculine and the feminine energy. So we have almost a fear, maybe, of at the time being afraid to step into your own power, because at the time you had turned your power over to the medical system and trusted that they were going to take care of you, look out for you, have your best interest at heart. The fact that you take the medication as prescribed, then have the injustice and the violation of the DUI, means that now you're sort of working with that same authority pattern that I talked about earlier. So now the authority figure who's supposed to be in control, knowledgeable, looking out for your safety, keeping you safe, and helping you, has now just injured you. And so what do we do with that? So now you go with the medicine that has the feminine quality to gently guide you to these realizations, holding you with love to help you see something. And you start to feel like the illusion has been shattered. So now if we were going to have fun with this and bring in some astrology, I would say, okay, Danielle, tell me your birth date, where you were born, what time you were born. Let me run your natal chart, and I want to see where Neptune is in your chart. Neptune being the planet of drugs and alcohol, Neptune being the planet of illusion. That can really trip us up when the illusion becomes shattered, or we realize the illusion that we've been living behind is no longer. And so that's a hefty one, because now we have to look at that and say, okay, how is this going to drive you? The fact that you were victimized by this system, how are you going to take that power back? How are you going to integrate the suffering of being wronged by a collective bigger than you, to not keep siphoning off any more power into that collective and instead take it back? And so I would have you sit with the fear of being powerless. I might even have you sit with the image of actually being pulled over, like what it looked like when you were sitting in the car and like the police officers coming up beside you. Walk me through that scene. Let's see if that feels comfortable for you to revisit. And then actually have you in the meditation sit with the image of you sitting in that seat as the officers like doing whatever, putting you in handcuffs, whatever the case may be. And if that's too painful, then I would have you hold the image of someone that you see as powerless. And then maybe we'll get to the point of you holding the image. But then you would want to work through activating that heart space and sending and receiving compassion and unconditional love to that you that's sitting in that car. And that's the stuff that brings up the waterfall of tears, because we're moving it's not a grief tear. It's not even a tearful tear. It's a movement of energy that's coming out in the form of tears through the eye ducts. And that's how we know we're making a shift. And so a distrust and incompetent authority, all validated by real life experiences, that then you now have to sort of sit with and say, well, I can still be mad. I can still be really mad. But underneath anger is fear. So what about the experience of being wronged by the collective was frightening to me? And we sit with that. And that's where the integration lands on that. Now, that's not to say that's your only pattern. When we talk about betrayal and feeling abandoned, it's usually around not being or feeling good enough, not lovable enough. And so that might play out in different parts of your life that we would sort of, break into if we were doing work together. But the hope would be to also identify what role the victim identity has served for you, how it's kept you safe, and how it's hindered you, how it's kept you stuck, and sort of begin to unpack that, and maybe even do some solar plexus work. I'd probably guide you into some solar plexus meditation where we're actually activating your power center in a way where you're now pulling in the hero archetype and you're integrating the energy of a hero archetype to not actually get done in life what you want to get done out of anger and punishment. You don't want to punish the collective because now it's ego driven, fear driven. You deserve to be punished. We don't want that. We elevate up out of that and we sit with the pain and suffering that came on being wronged by that collective. So that's sort of like the long and short of it, of how I would construct that.
Oof, that was so potent. Thank you for guiding us through that, and that process that you go through of like revealing the wounding that's underlying, and how to acknowledge that, sit with the wounding, be with it, face it, and the only way out is through, right? And then
Right.
ultimately alchemize that to empowerment. And I really appreciate that, and I'm gonna definitely integrate that into my consciousness and focus on the solar plexus moving forward.
Totally, totally. I love it. And I think this was hard work, you know. People, this is really all, and I'll just wrap with this sort of last question. Okay, so if we take psychedelics and we're in a dreamlike state, or we meditate and we're totally in a different state of consciousness, why not just stay there? Why do we have to bring this back into the physical 3D? And I don't know if anybody has ever seen the TED Talk. It was like maybe one of the original TED Talks by Jill Bolt Taylor called My Stroke of Insight, where she has the experience of having a stroke and sort of like realizes that something is going on in that moment. And she's sort of in this ethereal realm of right brain activity. Left brain is now incapacitated. And she's like, this is beautiful. I love being here. I don't actually want to come back from this place. And that can lead to existential angst. That can lead to questions around why do we even have to come back to this reality? For some people, it actually turns into suicidal ideation, because it's like, well, I'll just go there. I don't need to stay here. Like this is pointless to me. But the whole point of this work is to get the ego to surrender, as I've been saying, but not to destroy the ego the way we hear about ego destruction or ego death in the psychedelic space. We might dissolve the ego, surrender the ego, or have ego death while under the medicine. But the point is to come back here and actually reinvigorate the ego to allow for ego development, not necessarily long-term, lifelong ego death, because if we didn't have an ego, we wouldn't even be able to function in this reality. So you can't just stay out in the astral plane. The gift is to come back to the human experience, because as soon as we make things real, when we feel things in our body that we otherwise might access in a dream, for example, when we feel it in the physical body, it's so much more powerful when we incorporate the energy into the dense physical body. So sometimes you'll hear people say a psychedelic experience felt realer than real, and that might be true. But for the time being, we also have to acknowledge that there's something very real about the reality that we are in most of the time, most of us. Some of us spend more time in the ethereal realms, and we just have to look at how does that serve us? And is there a way that we can actually look at this existence as the gift and that as the opportunity to access pockets of information every time we sort of want to venture into that realm? But if we stay out there, we stay ungrounded. We got to have 1 foot planted there and 1 foot planted here, and actually look at the work to integrate, sort of like go there, take the information and come back. And that's why we really want to do the integration work, as opposed to just take psychedelics all the time, maybe, or meditate all the time and check out and go into another realm. It's about going to the other realm and coming back, in my opinion. And that's sort of also, you know, the importance of integration. And that's all I have.
I do have one follow-up question.
Yes.
How do we make peace with our suffering instead of being victimized?
So that answer comes in the form of sitting with the suffering in the meditation. So when you sit with the suffering, you will feel activated when you first sit down. You will feel probably a little distressed. You might even actually have sobbing. But if we can sit with the image of that fear long enough until it loses its power, we start to develop and cultivate a different relationship with that suffering. We're no longer on the receiving end of the suffering happening to us. We now have all of these insights that have been built to say we are a co-creator of our reality. We draw in certain people, we draw in certain experiences, we draw in certain energies if we are reacting out of a fear-based place. Once we start to resolve the fear, you watch how life changes, how it shifts for people. You watch how people have these wake up moments where they're like, you know what? I can't buy into this BS anymore. I'm leaving that job. I'm not working for that boss anymore. I don't care how much money I'm going to lose. That's not what life is about. I want to live in peace. I want to live free. And so the illusion shatters, and we no longer feel like we have to stay in this limited existence that we just feel victimized by. It's like when I started Third Realm, I could have stayed in that job and like kept trying to do this work on how I was going to receive instructions from an authority figure and try to respect authority a little bit more. That wasn't in the cards for me. I would have continued to be victimized if I had stayed in that system trying to force myself into a box that I didn't fit into. And now that I start my own thing, it's like I could be seeing 30 clients a week and there's not an ounce of stress that I feel about it, because as I sit with other people suffering, I'm also integrating my own and vice versa. So it's really about sort of like having the moments where you say, I don't want to do this anymore and I want to break free. You start to transmute what otherwise would have been a wounding pattern. You sit with it long enough for it to release. Maybe you'll be in the meditation for 2 hours. Maybe you'll be in the meditation for 5 minutes, but you'll know it when it comes and you'll feel it. And when it happens, it's profound. And that's when you start to say, you know what? Wow, my suffering is such a gift. What a gift, because now I have the space to hold all of this and I never have to really engage that fear anymore that that's going to take me over. Because if it hasn't taken me over yet, chances are I'm looking pretty good. Statistics would say I'm actually looking pretty good. So it's really about getting as close to the suffering as you can. It's just scary to do that because most of us would get taken over by the suffering.
Exactly. And I think that full empowerment is when we can face the suffering and integrate that into our life and ultimately like release that power that it's had over us and become more powerful. As we've talked about, Meagan, the 12 steps, and step number 1 should be, I am more powerful than my addiction. Let's open. Well, thank you so much for that potent transmission. And I'm really looking forward to opening this up to our community for questions. So let's open it up. I see, Chris, that you have your hand raised. Would you like to be featured on video, Chris?
Sure. So I would say that my mind is being blown, but it's not, because it's everything is kind of coming in alignment. And I'm going to try to be brief, but if you could just give me like 2 minutes, maybe. So I have been sober for 12 years, AA, tons of therapy. I work in the field, and so I started to explore this last year, and then I found that, San Francisco Psychedelic Society did this stuff. I gave you my love and kudos before we started. Through the webinar series, someone told me about psychedelicsinrecovery.org, the PIR 12 step. So I got active in that, and then I've been slow stepping all of this because I'm in recovery. In recovery, my sobriety matters to me, right? And so I took service commitments, I did these things, and then all of a sudden, and I just want to share this because it was in the webinar series that you said, don't try to find the medicine. When it's time, the medicine will find you. And you said that a number of times. And then within 1 week, 3 people offered it to me. And then I didn't go seeking it, In fact, someone had offered me 2 months before that, and it didn't feel right. So I said, thank you, but no, So I did my first session last Saturday, and I went with intention, and I prayed on the intention, and I had my intention was one word, and it was surrender. And then I went to this person's house, and he showed me through every room and says, you're a safe space, and this and that. And then he proceeded to dose me pretty high with what turned out to be a really heroic dose, and then some, equivalent of about 7.5 grams, and as I got used to being altered for the first time in 12 years, and that quickly went away, I tried to do the Johns Hopkins style with this and that and all, the music and that. And I just felt this, I just urged to laugh, and I could feel in my belly, I was holding it. And I just felt it so clearly. It was like the universe is trying to tell me a joke. And the real joke would be not letting go to laugh, right? And I just let go. And then for the next 8 hours, I took all that off, and I just sat on the porch, and I watched the trees, and I watched the birds, and I had conversations. And I said, if you want to do all that ceremony stuff, if you feel like you need to, coming in and out, and they're sharing the space, you can, but I invite you to just come as a human, and he just looked at me, he's like, this is your first time? I was like, yeah. And I was like, because for the first time in my life, I feel the authentic self that I kind of got sometimes on 3 or 4 beers, but then went away because I was drinking beers, right? And I had a whole day of sitting with myself and just watching all of these things come up and going, oh my God, it's like the Karate Kid scene with wax on, wax off. It's like all these 12 years of recovery. I have every tool. Every tool is here, and I just let go. And my takeaway was like, this is really simple. And I will wrap up here in a second, I promise. I got nauseous a couple of times because of mushrooms do that, right? And I felt like, well, shouldn't I have a purge, a big spiritual purge, a symbolic purge? And I just heard the voice say, if you feel like you need to do a symbolic purge, by all means, but it's not necessary. And so I had 8 hours of just being one with everything, really. You know, it sounds cliche, but it was like that. And for my abusers and anyone I ever had a resentment for, and my exes, and which I'm actually friends with most of my exes, but whatever, everyone came up and it was nothing but gratitude and love. And so fast forward a week later, what I'm finding is that I still have my thoughts. I'm back in life on planet Earth, and that's what this is about, right? Is coming back here and doing the work, but I'm not having that central nervous system response to every thought, and I can just sit with it now and look at it. And that's what I think the work is. And the last thing I wanted to share is, interestingly enough, to support what you were saying, right before this webinar, I got to actually ask James Fadiman a question on a Still Health webinar, and he was talking about his book with the you know, our multiple selves, and it's called Your Symphony of Selves. And he was speaking at length about that, and like you in your way were saying the exact same thing, and that's what it was like. I wrap up with one thing. I saw all the pain, I saw the resentment, and I saw it like as this like tar ball of just, and I didn't hate my sadness and want to cast it off. I looked at it as this poor energy that was brought into existence against its own will through a life of experience. I was like, why would I hate that energy? It's its own spirit. And I just wrote down, love your sadness. And that was it. And then a couple hours went away. And so I just want to thank you, because I'm so new. I've been slow stepping this for a year. Thank you to the San Francisco Psychedelic Society for preparing me. So when I walked through the door, it was like, no fear, no doubt. But I just wanted to share that. So thank you for being here right now this week, because damn it, couldn't have been better timing.
Love it. I'm getting chills right on. I think that's also the beauty, real quick, about why and how these psychedelics have shown up, especially in the addiction treatment world. But if we can shift the reaction that we have to the energy and actually seamlessly engage these patterns or whatever these uncomfortable feelings are, and do it from a different state of consciousness, it takes on a different meaning. And to be able to surrender in that moment, to say, I'm going to let the medicine do its work and I'm not going to fight it. I'm even going to surrender to the experience of nausea. That's incredibly powerful. I'll wrap by saying, I think the most important thing that people can take from any and everything that I just talked about tonight, and you hit on it, you have everything you already have everything you need. That's the wake up call. I'm just helping people realize that by showing it to them or handing the skills to them if they don't already have them. But the beauty is that we actually have everything we need. We just don't know it. And if we can be in the presence of somebody that can hold that space, I say, you can borrow my hope long enough until you build your own, because I sure as hell have hope that you can get this. And it's just a matter of how it's going to take place and when. But there's no doubt in my mind that people can get to that place. And so if we can stay committed, if we can ride the wave, and if we can have faith and wait for the opportunities when they come knocking at our door to be open, bingo, game over. Beautiful, beautiful. Thank you for sharing all of that.
Beautiful share. Thank you, Chris. Anyone else like to ask our wonderful speaker, Meagan, a question? Amanda.
Meagan, I loved hearing your story. I could personally relate to a lot of the things that you said, and I just found it really motivating and inspiring for me. So thank you very much. And my question for you is, any advice that you could give to me as a self-healer and a healer for others, as I actually am preparing for this upcoming weekend. I will have my first like trip sitting experience and like attempt energy healing towards another, as I had a friend who like kind of came out of nowhere like to me and asked for help in a situation that he has a lot going on, and he's considered psychedelics, but he never had an appropriate like entry point. And you know, this is like a really big thing that I am taking seriously, and I would like to know what advice you have for me to prepare for this, to hold space for another.
Absolutely. Great question. So just remember that you are the tool. Okay. So
Okay.
if you're anxious and you're going into a situation where you're meeting the unconscious mind of somebody else, know the power that you hold in that moment. So know that your unconscious mind is going to interact with the person's unconscious mind that's sitting with the medicine. And that's not to say that that's necessarily a bad thing, but you want to be clear about what is coming up for you. So sort of like what your wounds are, but even if you don't have that level of understanding around your own wounding patterns, the best advice that I could give is ground your energy, take care of yourself, get sleep, eat proper nutrition, maybe some root vegetables. If you eat red meat, eat some red meat before you go. Literally anchor yourself in your physical body by employing a few different avenues, and know that when you sit with somebody in that medicine, you want to be as free of anxiety as you possibly can, so that you're in the flow state, so then your unconscious mind can hold and be the container for this person as they navigate deeper into their experience. You're going to serve as their anchor. So you want to be as anchored as possible, and know that the agenda that you may have had in your mind about going in, what I'm going to do or what role I'm going to serve for this person, let it all go. Your only job is to show up, bring yourself, recognize what role you're playing in this person's experience, recognize that their unconscious mind is going to read your unconscious mind. So there is no hiding anything. Get clear and centered and grounded, so your anxiety is not coming in. And like, I'll just say, a lot of times before I started doing this work, I would think like I was hiding my anxiety to the naked eye, and I probably was. But there were a lot of energetic sort of eruptions that happened when other people's unconscious minds could read my unconscious mind, which was that I was petrified. And then things sort of go into a different direction. So the best advice that I can give is whatever you might already do to ground, sort of step that up, and maybe even find some guided grounded meditations on YouTube or whatever, where you feel like you can really center in and just hold the heart space. Know that everything's okay. Know that this person's going to be okay. It's their journey. Wish them the best on their journey. Have a mantra in your head. I hope, you know, you find what you're looking for, or something along those lines. And just breathe deeply through the experience, knowing that this person's going to be okay. And then if you stay grounded, you're going to serve as the exact tool that you need for this person to open up to whatever they need to open up to.
Thank you.
You're
And
welcome.
in your practice as a Reiki provider, so I'm level 1, meaning I've only practiced on myself and I haven't practiced on another person yet. Is there any like major piece of advice you can give me for beginning that?
Yes. So there's one self Reiki technique that I teach people to ground their energy, of just rubbing your hands together 30, 40 seconds until it warms up, fingers cupped, and you place this right on the front of your hip bones. Now, this technique has made my migraines go away, and I've been able to fall asleep within minutes. And then I did this with the client recently who had a sinus infection. She had an appointment scheduled with the doctor the next day. She did this technique on herself, cured herself of the sinus infection, and canceled the doctor's appointment. And it's all because you're taking your own energy to pull it out of the anxiety space and cognitive space up here and back down into the physical body. So you could even do that while you're sitting with this person, of actually, like when they're under the medicine, keep it, reminding yourself to stay grounded by actually just keeping your hands right on front of your hip bones, doing self Reiki on yourself, and employing and cultivating the intention of that energy to allow this person to be in sort of a stable, grounded place too, energetically.
Okay. And so would you recommend that I would kind of instruct them to like do this on themselves rather than me attempt to do it on them?
First I usually, that's a good move. If you feel like they need that skill, and they would be open to it, that's a quick and easy one to do. Sometimes when people are under the medicine, the ego isn't intact enough to kind of like logically figure out how to do that. So I always actually work with breath, use the breath as the anchor. It's the easiest thing to access. But if you feel like this person is familiar enough with Reiki, would be comfortable doing that on themselves, or is starting to have maybe a difficult experience and you're kind of stepping in to maybe help them ground and keep them stable, maybe you can practice that with them before you go in, show them what to do, show them how it works. and then gently remind them that that is an option for them if they become ungrounded and start having a challenging experience.
Definitely. I like that a lot. Thank you.
You're very welcome. Good luck.
Thank you, Amanda. So excited to see hear about all the incredible souls and lives that you impact through your work. Who else has a question for Meagan? Chris, welcome back.
I'll be really quick. So I've had a couple of years of all the stress tests and the EKGs and this and that. So I'm in a better place after this week, but I have noticed that even though I'm all doing well and eating well and sleeping well, where does the heart pain come from? Because physically I'm fine. So why is that, what would cause something like that?
Well, there's a self-Reiki technique that I use for folks that will experience physical symptoms in the heart, and it's sort of along the same lines. 30 to 40 seconds, cup the hands, place one hand over the heart and the other hand over the other hand. That can really help channel some of your own energy back up into the heart space to create sort of a healing experience. If I shift and say symbolically what might be going on with you, sort of just like energetically, I might want to explore your experience of relationships that have ended in unkind or unsettling ways that then have led to an experience of grief, let's say. So if we have pain in the heart, I might want to explore grief. Now, I have some patterns with grief, and I've actually never lost anybody that close to me where it would cause me to have complicated grief. But the reason how I know grief is when I cry, the way the muscles gather in my chin is such a clear indication of grief. So I know I have it. So that it doesn't mean that you've had to lose people in your life that has been unresolved and therefore it leads to grief. But there's something around saying goodbye, letting go, ending relationships, something that might be coming up in the unconscious mind for you that's showing up in physical form in the heart. I'm just taking a stab at it. That could be totally off, but I also might sort of look a little bit at sort of being able to nurture yourself. So the heart pumping blood being sort of the system that we need in order to essentially keep us alive. And what role blood, I don't know. I don't want to be that graphic, but I would maybe explore that a little bit deeper and even do a little research. I'm like, okay, what symbolic representation does the heart have? Does blood have? And then sort of like see, does that apply to my own life and my own patterns? Thanks for the question. Good question.
Thank you, Meagan. I feel like we are taking away a lot of practical tools that we can use in our everyday lives and teach others. May your teachings ripple out into the collective consciousness of our community.
Love it. Thank you all for having me.
And where can people find you?
So on Instagram at Third Realm Integration or thirdrealmintegration.com. It's probably the best way to find me. And I am so grateful to all of you guys for being present, coming through the density of this material with me, and then asking sort of really practical questions about how you take this and move sort of like into your own life as a provider. And Amanda, just to your question real quick, I will tell you the shift that happened for me when I recognized sort of like what role I was playing when I started to sit with people and that it wasn't me as the blank slate, removed me from the equation. And then there's this person that I'm supposed to help, was Gabor Mate's work of compassionate inquiry, healing the healer, in the myth of vicarious trauma, that we don't absorb other people's trauma. Our unresolved, unintegrated trauma gets activated in the presence of someone else's. So if you do follow his work, I would recommend, looking at some of his YouTube videos, but I think he's kind of a genius. And I've seen him do somatic experiencing demonstrations live in real time with people who have survived the gnarliest of trauma. And I will tell you, it was a game changer. So I do believe in his work profoundly.
So do I.
Huge.
He's great.
Yeah, agreed.
Could you add his name in the chat, please?
Totally.
Daniel Shankin, so great to see you here.
Hi, Megan. I saw you were going to be here, and I just wanted to pop in and say hello. It was, it's good to see you again. It's been so long since we last spoke.
Daniel, it's so good to see you.
It looks like you're doing awesome stuff. It was really great to hear your message. It's super on point.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Appreciated. And it's a blessing to be here because I know you guys get it. I'm sort of preaching to the choir here. And that feels really good, actually. So thank you.
But you're also bringing some incredibly unique teachings. So I really appreciate you enlightening us and bringing your awareness and your life experience and these tools into our community. I'm just so grateful. I would love to open it up to our community if there's any other questions or reflections before we start to come to a close tonight.
Ooh, I have one, you guys. I know this could be a rabbit hole, but I just thought it was so interesting how you mentioned that the solar plexus is associated with the hero archetype. And you had mentioned planets also being associated with some archetypes as well. And I was just curious if there are any other physical associations or planetary associations with archetypes that, I don't know, any of your favorites that we might want to keep in mind.
Oh, yeah. Okay. So let me just say that if you guys do stay up to date on anything that I'm working on, in the next year, I'm probably going to be creating a game respective of planetary archetypes to help all of this make sense that I can actually use in my work with people. So my favorite ones are, well, Chiron, the healer, the wounded healer is really like the coolest story in Greek mythology that I've ever heard of. What's cool is that the astrologers nowadays are actually exploring so many more planets that were otherwise unknown to us. And so we're learning about more of these archetypes. And so they keep developing. The new one is the planet of, it's Mars's sister, Eris. She's the female awakener. She's the one that takes to the streets and protests. She's the one that rejects man-made rules that she can't respect. We're seeing that a lot these days based on where she's positioned in the sky. And then obviously, the big ones, Neptune, the planet of illusion, plays a big role in my life. Jupiter, planet of expansion. Venus, mother archetype. Saturn, father archetype. I think I said Mars, warrior. Chiron, the wounded healer, which was discovered in 1977 in the Vietnam War. So walking through fire, essentially forged by fire, is sort of like the metaphor for Chiron, the wounded healer. Yeah, it's just I just love that stuff, like Uranus, the awakener. So we're seeing a lot of that right now because Uranus was just in Taurus. So the eruption and the awakening of the earth. So we're seeing floods, earthquakes, volcanoes. We're seeing that around the world. So all of this stuff starts to make sense when you're like, whoa, real life stuff is happening. And according to these astrologers, it's all because the planets are positioned somewhere up in the sky. Then it gets manifested in physical form down here. And then it's like, whoa, this actually lines up. So yes, all very cool stuff. And the cool thing about it is otherwise archetypes might sound really confusing to people if I phrase it as like personalities in us. When I can say when I can use planetary archetypes to teach this stuff, it's so easy. It's like, makes so much sense. And it's so not personal. It's like, oh, I have all of these patterns that like everybody else has. And this isn't just like me being like extra wounded. This stuff actually exists in the cosmos already. These personalities are already up there. And so what relationship can I cultivate with these different archetypes just by using the planets? It kind of tells a story. It's kind of fun to do it. So.
That's so cool. Thank you. I would love to, yeah, please keep us posted when you come out with that. I'm sure everyone here would be very interested. That's awesome.
Would love to. I'll keep you guys apprised.
Well, Meagan, it has been an absolute honor to have this very, very insightful cosmic deep dive with you. And I'm just so grateful to be in frequency in the psychedelic community with you. Thank you for sharing your gifts with us. And I'm really looking forward to watching you grow and being a part of that growth for you and supporting you on this path. And thank you for the expansion you've brought to all of our minds today.
Love it, love it, love it. Thank you all. Thank you for sharing the space with me. And I wish you many blessings on your journeys. May you find what you're looking for.
And thank you so much to each one of you in our membership community for coming to this talk today, for being a part of our community, and know that we're here as an ongoing resource for you. And just a quick announcement, we sent this out in the email, but we are in the midst of our brand new course, which we're really, really excited about, that focuses on Amanita muscaria for anxiety and panic, the mushroom that's behind us. And we've partnered with our dear friend Amanita Dreamer, who healed her anxiety and dependency to anti-anxiety medication with this sacred mushroom. And we teach all about safe practices, how to work with it, the science, the history of this mushroom. And there's absolutely no other offering like this that's out there. And she's just such a potent channel for information and a channel of the mushroom. And we're really looking forward to continuing to grow this educational offering for her, with her. So you can find that offering. Emily will put it in the chat, and members receive 20% off of this. So looking forward to seeing, we have some members that have already signed up to be in this course with us, like Amanda and Daniel, and we're looking forward to, and Nikki, and we're looking forward to being with many of you to come. Sending you all a lot of love, and see you next campfire.